Hello everybody, I'm Rishad Salamat. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, unlocking Venezuela's oil wealth or a resource grab. Donald Trump wants to revive the nation's oil industry after capturing its president, but can he? And how will that reshape the global energy map? And US pressure on Iran is intensifying too. Iranians have taken to the streets as inflation rises, the currency slides, and sanctions bite. So, who's to blame for the crisis and can it be fixed? From Venezuela's oil to Iran sanctions, the US says economic pressures designed to change policy. Critics call it coercion. So, what is really behind these measures and do they work? A nation with the world's largest oil reserves, Venezuela is now at the center of a high-stakes economic power play over energy supply with global ramifications. The US says it'll control the sales and revenue of Venezuelan oil indefinitely, days after it captured the nation's president, Nicolas Maduro. President Donald Trump wants American companies to invest billions of dollars to revive the nation's industry. Washington says that would benefit the people of Venezuela and the United States. Critics, though, have called the move modern-day colonialism and a direct grab for energy resources. But is it? Can Venezuela's oil industry be restored, and who stands to benefit? We'll discuss this with our guest shortly. But first, President Donald Trump said in a social media post Venezuela would soon hand over 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the US. Trump added that he would control the profits from those sales, suggesting that Venezuela has agreed to use its oil funds to buy products only from the US. Washington says that would be part of a three-phase plan. The Venezuelan oil industry and economy have been under broad US sanctions, which were recently expanded to include a full blockade of oil exports. Michael Apple reports on how the events unfolded.
The capture and detention of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro by US forces continues to make waves politically and in the markets. Shares in Chevron, the only American oil company currently operating in Venezuela, ticked upwards in the immediate aftermath of the operation. So too did shares in Valero, an American-based fuel refiner, which jumped by double digits. While the Trump administration says Maduro's capture is about bringing to justice an indicted fugitive on drug charges, the US president has also made no secret what else this is about.
The oil is just flowing at a very low level, much lower than, even if it was badly run, it should have more income, more oil than what they're doing. So we're going to have the big oil companies go in, and they're going to fix the infrastructure, they're going to invest money.
And this is why Venezuela's oil sector matters. It has the world's largest reserves of over 300 billion barrels, equivalent to nearly a fifth of global oil reserves. Despite this, it accounts for less than 1% of the world's oil consumption, constrained by aging infrastructure and sanctions. It's estimated the sector would need $183 billion of investment over the next decade and a half to get back to its 2005 output of 3 billion barrels per day. But in an environment of political instability and low oil prices, American oil giants might have less appetite to commit to large-scale investments there. American oil giants have been involved in Venezuela for more than a century, but the sector's nationalization in 1976 saw American assets taken for very little. The later expropriation without compensation of foreign-run oil fields in 2007 has bolstered Washington's stance today that Venezuela stole American oil. China buys most of Venezuela's exported oil, representing less than 5% of its overall oil imports. A shadow fleet of tankers help Caracas, Russia, and Iran circumvent Western sanctions. But experts believe the US's naval blockade of Venezuela could lead to higher costs for some other oil producers like Russia. Caracas told the international community what it believes is behind what it calls the worst practices of colonialism.
Venezuela is a victim of these attacks as a result of its natural wealth, oil, energy, strategic resources, and the geopolitical position of our country.
President Trump is adamant they'll take the lead in rebuilding Venezuela's oil industry and upping output, a move that analysts predict could weaken OPEC countries and starve Russia's oil-dependent economy of much-needed revenue. Michael Appel, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Well, joining us for this discussion is Neil Atkinson from London. He's an independent energy analyst who has worked at Venezuela's state oil firm Petroleos de Venezuela, or PDVSA. And in Caracas, we're joined by Jose Chalhoub, a geopolitical risk analyst focusing on the South American energy landscape and the Middle East. A warm welcome to you both. Neil, the US says it's going to control Venezuela's oil indefinitely. Well, what does that actually mean? And the second part of the question is, how does that change the oil dynamic globally, particularly when it comes to China, who's the biggest buyer of Venezuelan oil?
Well, in terms of what does it mean by running Venezuela, that at the moment isn't very clear, because while the United States has said, and indeed is, controlling oil exports in this very short term, and that is running, if you like, because it's being directed to the US. To be running Venezuela or running PDVSA implies putting in people who you believe are committed to or aligned with your policies, and how they're going to do that, I don't quite know. But the far more important issue, I think, is the global oil market. And as far as Venezuela is concerned, in the short term at least, this makes no difference to the global oil market whatsoever. Venezuela's production is not going to go up in the short term, and it might even go down a little bit, but even not by very much. The oil that has been flowing to China, mainly as repayment for loans from to Venezuela from China, that oil will now probably, if it doesn't continue to flow to China, will go to the United States. So there's no additional barrels entering or particularly leaving the market. What this means globally, again, doesn't really make much difference in the short term for the oil market. Longer term, if President Trump's wish that international companies, mainly American, go into Venezuela, invest tens of billions of dollars because of the huge resource base that you talked about earlier, then Venezuela's production could grow again over the next 10, 20 years, back up to 1.5, 2 million, maybe even 3 million barrels a day. But that's going to take a long time. So long term, this is a big deal if the United States does follow through and sticks with it. In the short term, as we've seen from the oil price, there's very little impact.
So the thing is, how would this work legally? I mean, is there any precedent for this? But what would give the Americans actually the legal right to oversee Venezuela's oil?
Yeah, well, thank you for the invitation. And well, definitely there's no precedent. I mean, this is the first time ever Venezuelans, first of all, see these type of action, these recent airstrikes against Caracas, different military sites. First of all, the capture and extraction of President Nicolas Maduro. That's the first thing. And the second of all, what President Trump is doing right now is totally illegal in terms of first of all, seizing these oil tankers, like a naval embargo against any shipments of sanctioned oil going out from Venezuela to China, in this case, regarding the recent tankers that were seized. And second of all, according to recent statements by the Trump administration in terms of practically controlling every barrel of oil that will go out from Venezuelan ports to the United States ports in the Gulf Coast, and specifically right now, considering that Chevron is the only U.S. oil company operating in Venezuela. But this is illegal in legal terms. And of course, this is the practical corollary of the recent national security strategy that the Trump administration recently published, kind of the neo-Monroe doctrine that practically seeks to reassert the influence of the United States in the Americas, and in this specific case, in trying to control Venezuela's oil industry and production.
So, Neil, this brings me to the question, why is Venezuela's oil so important? Because if you look at the crack spread, it's in a really, really difficult place. It's very heavy oil. And the only places where it gets refined, I suppose, are those fairly, how can I say, derelict refineries in Texas.
not all of Venezuela's oil is heavy or very heavy. There is lighter oil in the eastern part of Venezuela, which is very marketable. And even the heavy and extra heavy oil that you're talking about, prior to the degradation of the industry after Chavez and Maduro came to power, that oil was extracted, it was processed, it was turned into marketable crude, and it was lapped up by refiners, not just in the United States, mainly in the US, that's true, but also in Europe and elsewhere. So the issue is Venezuela had a fully functioning, world-class national oil company prior to the advent of Chavez in 1999. And over time, given investment, given the right investment, given technical expertise, which would be brought in from abroad to augment the industry culture which already exists in Venezuela, you could envisage Venezuela's production rising again, and that heavy oil that you're talking about, using the equipment and the infrastructure which is already there, but sure, in a bad condition, that oil would be very heavily welcomed, very much welcomed in the US Gulf Coast, because it's generally cheaper and generally yields a higher profit for refiners. So, you know, I don't think the extra heavy oil, in the long run at least, once the equipment is back up and running, is necessarily such a big deal.
So, Jose, the thing ultimately, who does benefit? Is it essentially the American motorist? Because petrol prices may fall. How do Venezuelans benefit from this?
Well, it's too early to tell. I mean, we're just coming fresh off these recent events in Venezuela. I mean, the people here in Caracas are tremendously concerned and shocked. Even there's a tense calm in Caracas. The economic crisis just keeps on worsening. In the short term, if there's no significant investment by the U.S. oil companies in recovering Venezuela's oil production, I highly doubt that this will benefit the population overall, because it will much depend also on the type of agreements and contracts that PDVSA will sign with the different U.S. oil companies, if they ever come, if they ever carry out investments, because we have reading and seeing different statements by U.S. oil companies that they're not daring to pour fresh investments, considering the still unstable and risky environment that they see still existing in Venezuela. So for now, Venezuelans are mostly concerned of the ongoing economic crisis, still waiting to see what will happen in terms of political developments, because there's nothing clear as yet. Because even if there's a still functioning government with the interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, in power, with the support and the backing and the kind of instructions by the Trump administration, there's still hardliners like the Minister of Interior, Diosdado Cabello, or the Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino, who don't seem too much content with all the situation that is unfolding in Venezuela. So for now, I think it's too early to tell what benefits will Venezuelans have out of this, even if there's too much hope for now.
And Neil, please hold those thoughts. We've got to look at another aspect to all this. President Donald Trump says Venezuela stole American oil, but here's a look at what actually happened. U.S. oil companies began drilling in Venezuela more than a century ago, helping to build the country's oil industry. Venezuela's oil is heavy, dense, and proved to be the perfect blend for American refineries, a relationship that shaped both countries' energy ties for decades. That changed in the 1970s. That's when Venezuela nationalized its oil sector and created the state-owned petroleum company Petroleras de Venezuela S.A., or PDVSA. And they partnered with foreign oil companies at a steep cost, a 60% equity stake in their joint ventures. Now, when President Hugo Chavez took office in 1999, the government tightened its grip and foreign oil assets were expropriated. Major oil companies like ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips left the country in 2007, and they're still seeking billions of dollars in compensation. Today, Chevron is the last remaining American oil company operating in the country, kept there through a U.S. sanctions waiver. Well, Neil and Jose are still with us. And Neil, what do you make of this argument that this oil belongs, or these oil companies, or the nationalized oil companies actually belong to the U.S.?
Well, oil belongs to the countries that sit on top of it. It's simple as that. And in the 1970s, Venezuela's elected government took a decision, which is the right of a sovereign elected government, to nationalize its industry. It wasn't the first one to do it. At the end of the 60s, some of the other OPEC countries started nationalizing their oil industries. And indeed, Saudi Arabia nationalized its oil industry in the early 1980s. So Venezuela was not doing something which was outlandish. It was very much the fashion of the time. Whether the companies were properly compensated enough or not is a legal matter, and I don't have a particularly strong view on that. What's worth noting is that in the early 1990s, Venezuela or PDVSA started working again with foreign oil companies that were invited back into Venezuela to invest in certain oil fields. And that process had started. Chavez came in, it continued for a while, and then Chavez threw out the foreign companies without adequate compensation in their view. So we'll have to see how that works. But the oil does not belong to US oil companies. It belongs to Venezuela. And it's I think the responsibility of the US to negotiate with the Venezuelan government, whichever one it is, a system whereby the oil is produced, it is sold to, there is a concession to American companies, and we operate in a normal fiscal regime, which you see in every other country in the world.
Neil,
and if there is a legal dispute, then settle it.
Neil, very, very quickly here as we come to the end of this segment, do you actually think that American oil companies are going to be that interested in going to Venezuela? Because it may take them years to make any money.
Well, not unless stability is restored and there is law and order, there's adequate electricity, food supply, fuel supply, security, medicine. They're not going to go into Venezuela without stability. If they were to do so, as you say, it will take a very long time and they will see a return. But it would be a long, long time. And ExxonMobil was very cautious at the weekend about this. And we'll just have to wait and see how the political situation in Venezuela evolves.
Very, very quickly as well, so the last question here. Is this modern colonialism? Is this an economic land grab or oil grab?
Yes, for sure, for sure. We're assisting to a new way of land grab and resource grab, and in this case, by the government of the United States. We're just recently hearing news Greenland as well, in statements by the Trump administration in using military power if they need to do so in taking over Greenland as well. So definitely this is, and we saw it also in the previous months regarding the control of the Panama Canal in the U.S. contest against China as well. So that, yes, definitely this is a new way of economic war and resource grab.
Jose, thank you. Jose Shalhoub there, a geopolitical risk analyst focusing on South American energy. And of course, Neil Atkinson, an independent energy analyst. Thank you to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
But as Venezuela enters a new era, another oil-rich nation, which is its closest ally, is hitting breaking point. In Iran, the currency, the rial, has fallen to record lows against the dollar, sparking a wave of protests in the capital, Tehran, and other cities. Iran's economy is struggling with inflation and Western sanctions linked to its nuclear program, which is dragging down growth. The government says it's taking measures to help ease the economic pain to appease the protesters. But the Iranian leadership accuses foreign powers like Israel and the US of driving the unrest and has long warned Western nations aim to topple it. Dohed Asadi has been following the protests, and he reports from Tehran.
Protests have broken out in Iran after some shopkeepers in Tehran's Grand Bazaar shut down their businesses almost 2 weeks ago, angered by the country's worsening economic situation. The bazaar, long seen as the bellwethers of public sentiment, turned into flashpoint for frustration. What began in the capital quickly spread to other cities, sparking scattered rallies. In some cases, the unrest flared into violence, leaving fatalities, injuries, and arrests in its wake. While protests continue sporadically, daily life for many Iranians remains under growing strain.
We have had to give up even simple pleasures like going out to restaurants because of rising costs. It's become difficult to afford basic items like dairy products, meat and poultry. Being able to live comfortably really matters for people.
The market is completely stagnant. Many businesses just can't keep up with rising costs, income and expenses. As they say, no longer add up. Prices climb every day. The government needs to come up with a solution.
People must be free to voice their demands and be heard rather than silenced with force. At the same time, protesters must avoid damaging public properties.
Years of international sanctions, compounded by domestic mismanagement, have left Iran's economy in deep distress. The currency, the rial, has long been in decline, recently hitting new record lows. The economic squeeze has chipped away at public confidence and fueled discontent, with working and lower middle classes struggling to cover daily essentials. What has pushed many into rallies is not restlessness alone, but the weight of empty pockets, privation, unpaid bills, and the quiet erosion of dignity brought on by scarcity. Public dissatisfaction exists whether or not people take to the streets. Many here are watching to see how the government will respond, not just to the protests, but to the economic hardships they face in their daily lives. Toida Sedi, Al Jazeera, counting the cost. Tehran.
Well, here's a snapshot of the state of Iran's economy. The local currency has plummeted by more than 70% in a year to 1.4 million rials to the US dollar. The loss in purchasing power has led to rocketing inflation of about 50%, and that's the official number. While the price of basic food and medical items, well, they've risen by as much as 70%. Iran is rich in resources with the world's fourth largest oil reserves, but the country faces tighter sanctions, and that's rattled markets and, of course, limited its access to foreign currency. Well, let's look into all of this further with our guest from Düsseldorf in Germany, where we're joined by Mohammed Fazanegan, and he's a professor and chair of economics of the Middle East Research Group in Marburg University. Thank you so much for joining us, Mohammed. Give us a sense of what is going wrong in Iran, because even the supreme leader has said that, okay, he's implied that sanctions, of course, are damaging, but he does say that a lot of the blame lies squarely on their shoulders.
Well, the main reasons for the current economic situation, of course, is external pressure under the sanctions. The sanctions have significantly damaged the welfare of Iranians. The currency that we see at the moment in the crisis has this reason, the supply problem. The hard currencies are limited. The main reason for that is the amounts of oil which is exported by Iran to its main client, which is China, is hard to return back these petrodollars. So we are facing barter transactions. So this supply is limited, mainly because of the sanctions and, of course, the domestic factors, over-regulation, institutional factors which are forcing exporters to bring back their earned hard currency at the lower rates. So they are not doing that. They are delaying returning back their earned hard currencies. So that also creates another supply limitations. And this is the situation. The demand for hard currency exceeds the supply, and we are observing higher prices for US dollar in the market. So with the sanctions, we are observing this situation. Beyond of that, of course, the domestic corruption adding to the problem.
I mean, I think the president of the country has also said that they have limited options here. They are limited. What can they do?
Well, as you might have heard in the news in Iran, one very important reform that they have just initiated is to remove these subsidized hard currency US dollar for basic goods. In the past, with medicine, oil, eggs, red meat, these essential goods was receiving much cheaper hard currencies, US dollar for importers. Due to this limited availability of these US dollars, so the state has decided to remove these subsidized US dollar. So that means that the prices of these essential goods will increase. In return, These amounts have been given to the household, Iranian household. So 1 million tomans per day per month, which is around, at the current market rate, is around $7 per month, 22 cents per day per person. This is supposed to compensate the higher import prices of essential goods. So the reform was important because it was the source of rent-seeking. Specific importers, politically connected importers, were receiving this subsidized hard currency, which was limited due to sanctions, and was importing these goods and was selling in the market, not necessarily at the prices that they were supposed to sell, but at the higher prices. So it was not helping the inflation, control of inflation. So the state has decided to remove these rents and give the money to the people. But the question is, how much this removal of subsidized US dollar will add to the domestic inflation in the forthcoming weeks and months, and whether this compensation would be enough. So the option on the hand of Iranian government are very limited. So without lifting the sanctions and without these pressures from abroad, any solution at the current time would not result to the control of situation.
Very quickly, is there a way out without the lifting of sanctions? Very quickly.
Well, yes, the temporary solutions in order to control these protests, at least for a year or something like that, is to revise the tax plan for the next budget of Iran, which is starting in March 2026. So the Iranian state has announced to cover 50% of the budget by taxes. This is the first time in the modern budgeting of Iran that so much burden would be imposed on the businesses. So this is generally a good move for relying on the taxation of the business, but the timing of these plans are not optimal. So when the country is under economic recessions, you cannot significantly increase the tax burden. It just add to the informal economy, and it would even frustrate more the bazaars. So today protests are basically economically driven. The middle class, which has been significantly weakened in Iran, are joining the low-income groups of the population. And this coalition between previously middle class of Iran and the current low-income groups have been added to the problem of these protests.
Mohammed, thank you so much. Mohammed Fazanegan, Professor and Chair of Economics of the Middle East Research Group at Marburg University. Thank you very much. And that is it for this edition. Get in touch with us on X. I'm at Rishad TV, and do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or drop us an email. Counting the cost at aljazeera.net is our address. But there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. And that's it for Counting the Cost. I'm Rishad Salamat from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.